So when it comes to powerlifting, I feel like a lot of people try to find different ways to optimize their performance, which is completely fine. That is definitely what you want to be doing. You want to be finding ways to optimize your performance, to make things better, to get stronger, to make things more efficient when you lift. And that can include things like improving your technique, improving your programming, improving your external variables, such as your food, your water, your sleep. But I think there is one key thing that a lot of beginner powerlifters miss when they're trying to get better at powerlifting. And the one key thing I think is really underrated as well for a lot of powerlifters. And I feel like a lot of powerlifters, when they aren't doing this thing, they really don't know what's missing. I think the thing that's missing for a lot of people is consistency and stability in their lifting schedule. And what I mean by that is not a lifting schedule in competition. What I mean by that is basically the days and the times that they lift. By lifting on the same day at roughly the same time, that makes things a lot more predictable and it makes things less chaotic when it comes to your training. When I first started lifting, when I first started training, I did a lot of sporadic training. I was on a program, but I basically just went to the gym whenever I felt like I wanted to go for a session or when my friends were going. And so that caused my gym schedule, my lifting schedule to be very sporadic, very chaotic. I'll train sometimes on Monday, then I have a rest day, then train on Wednesday, maybe train on Thursday, rest on Friday, then maybe train on Saturday, depending on how I felt. And in doing so, I thought that I was doing the right thing because I wasn't training on the days where I felt tired. And then I was training on the days where I felt good, right? And that does make some logical sense. You go to the gym when you feel like you've got energy, so you can put a lot of effort and energy into your session. And then maybe you put a lot of energy into that session, so the next day you rest. And then you go into your session the next day. It makes a lot of sense to do that. However, when it comes to powerlifting training, especially the way that I coach, and I feel like a lot of progressive coaches are now programming and coaching their clients, is that I want to try and make performance as predictable as possible. And the reason for this is because by making performance predictable, this then allows us to understand what we need to do to get you ready for a competition. Because ultimately, when it comes to powerlifting, for a lot of people, they do train to compete. Now, if you're not someone who is training to compete, that's totally fine. But by making your performance predictable on a particular day, that allows us to create consistency in your progression and in your performance. And so that's why I think that creating consistency and stability in your training schedule really is an underrated key. And what I mean by creating a consistent schedule is essentially training on the same day at the same time, regardless of how you feel. I have some lifters who have started with me who maybe take a day off because they've had a long day of work. Or, for example, their food intake was not as great that day, so they take that day off and try to fix it up the next day. But what this does is it ruins your consistency. There's a breakdown in the consistency and in the predictability of your performance. And so what you want to be doing instead is training on exactly the same day, regardless of how you feel. So, say for example, I've got 4 days of training and I choose to train day 1 on Monday, day 2 on Tuesday, I rest on Wednesday, do day 3 on Thursday, rest on Friday, and then day 4 on Saturday. If I'm able to maintain this consistent schedule, what this means is, say for example, I've got a primary day on Thursday on day 3 and a primary day and primary days on Saturday. Say for example, I've got my primary squat day on day 3 and primary bench and deadlift day on day 4. That means that I know every Thursday and Saturday, I'm going to have a heavier day. I'm going to have a heavier squat on Thursday, and I'm going to have heavy bench and heavy deadlifts on Saturday. Now, by building this consistent schedule and basically reminding yourself that you have these heavy days, you can use your week and you can basically prepare yourself for these heavy days as the week progresses. Now, not only can you prepare yourself mentally, psychologically, and by controlling those external factors, the other thing that we can do as coaches is we can provide you with primer days to lead into those primary days. And the other thing is also, by ensuring that these days are exactly the same day every week, it allows us to track your performance and therefore allow for some predictability in your performance. Now, this is not discounting the value of your technique. It's not discounting the value of the program itself. It's not discounting the value of making your lifts more efficient and being just stronger and progressing in strength. Those definitely have value in getting stronger and improving your performance when it comes to powerlifting. Those definitely have a place. So I'm not saying that those variables and those factors should not be considered at all. Those are all very definitely important. But I really do think that this is a very underrated and very underutilized factor when it comes to powerlifting. So if you feel like you're not really able to see some consistency in your performance, you're not really aware of your progress, then one thing that you should definitely be looking at is developing some consistency and stability in your training schedule. Now, the other thing about fostering stability and consistency in your training is it makes our jobs as coaches, I wouldn't say easier, but it makes things easier to calculate. It makes things easier to figure out. Say, for example, you have 3 bench days. You bench on day 2, you bench on day 3, and you bench on day 4. Day 2 is like a high volume day. Day 3 is a higher intensity day, so you push more like heavier singles, triples, doubles, whatever. And then you have your primary day on the 3rd day of your benching. As a coach, what we can then do is understand the impacts of these 2 secondary or tertiary days before your primary day. Say, for example, this block, we push the volume on your first bench day to say sets of 7, 4 sets of 7. And what ends up happening is it causes, what you end up seeing is that on your primary day, your performance tanks. What it then allows us to do is create hypothesis, create some sort of analysis to understand why that primary day did not perform as well as it could have. From there, as a coach, what we can then do is manipulate this first day and alter the volume so that way we can figure out exactly what sort of rep schemes, exactly what sort of stimulus your body needs in order to perform on that primary day. Now, if your training schedule is completely whack, you do these days on all these different days, you do your first bench day on a Tuesday, the next week you're doing it on a Wednesday, the next week you're doing it on a Tuesday again, that ruins that consistency. That does not allow for coaches to see predictability in your performance. And so there are a whole bunch of other variables which do come into play when it comes to your performance. On any particular day, you might be feeling more tired, you might have less food intake. And the other thing that it does is, say for example, you do your first bench day on Tuesday, the next week you do it on a Wednesday, but then your 3rd bench day, your primary bench day is consistently on a Saturday. Now, having the first bench day move between Tuesday and Wednesday means that the rest time between that first bench day and your primary bench day is altered. There might be 2 rest days in between, there might be 3 rest days in between, and it doesn't allow us to really understand how much time you need to recover and how much time you require in order to perform on that primary day. Now, this isn't just bench. It's not just like for your bench microcycle. This can be relevant to both squats and deadlifts. And a client example that I can use is I have a client who pulls sumo deadlifts, and he pulls his sumo deadlifts twice a week. On his previous blocks, we had him deadlifting on Tuesday as his secondary day, and he was running pauses on that day as his secondary day. Then we had run his primary day on a Friday, and what we found was on that Friday he was consistently showing up. He was consistently not showing up, I should say. He felt like his legs weren't on. He felt like he wasn't able to push into the floor. He felt like he wasn't essentially on going into that primary day. And so we ran that for a few blocks and really came to understand that when he had his primary day on a Friday and his secondary day on a Tuesday, he just wasn't able to show up that well on that Friday. Now, what we ended up doing is for one block, we tried pushing that primary day back one. And essentially what had happened was by moving that primary day back one, so moving the primary day from a Friday to a Thursday, we actually saw his performance peak and show up a lot better on that Thursday. And so what we hypothesized is by moving that primary day back one, it meant that he was still he was able to use the stimulus that he derived from his secondary day to push into that primary day. And we hypothesized that having 2 days of rest in between meant that he was coming to his primary day understimulated. Now, this would not have happened if his training schedule was not consistent. Say, for example, he consistently did his secondary deadlift day on a Tuesday, and then sometimes he did his deadlifts on a Friday, sometimes he did it on a Saturday, sometimes didn't have time to do it on a Friday, or didn't make time, didn't prioritize time to do that primary deadlift day on a Friday, and ended up doing it on a Saturday sometimes. That would not have allowed me as his coach, to really understand the data and to extrapolate the data and create this hypothesis that he was going into his primary day understimulated. And this may have not allowed me to make that decision to push his primary day back 1 day and actually get his primary day deadlifts to show up properly. The outcome of this change was essentially when he was deadlifting on that primary day on the Friday, he was getting to about 180 and he felt like he could not push more than that. After one block of change, from moving that primary day from Friday to Thursday, he ended up pulling 200 at the end of that block, just by moving that day back and ensuring that his training schedule was consistent. So that is a real life example of how much of an impact training consistently can have on being able to predict your performance and being able to create these hypotheses and extrapolate data properly. Now, if your days are not consistent and it's everywhere, then there isn't consistent data to extrapolate and then make hypothesis from, then make analysis from. So if you do feel like your performance and your progress is a bit inconsistent at the moment, one key thing that is very underrated is just train consistently on consistent days at consistent times. That is something that can be done quite easily as well. It's not like a technique change where you have to keep practicing it and it develops over time. It's not like performing a brand new variation of something, doing a pause or doing a tempo of whatever. It's literally just making sure that you train on exactly the same days. Now, these have lifestyle implications too. By ensuring that you train on exactly the same days, you can actually work out your life, your schedule around things. You work out whether you're studying, whether you're working, your studies and your work schedule around your training. And I'm not saying that you need to make powerlifting your life and everything has to revolve around your training. I'm not saying that at all. But what I am saying is that it actually makes things easier if you just know that, okay, from this time to this time, I'm training. From this time to this time, I'm training. From Mondays, 6 p.m. to 9 p.m., I'm training. By having that consistency, you can then work out your schedule from there. You can figure out what time you're able to train, what time you're able to study, what time you're able to train, what time you're able to work in your side hustle, for example. By making this change and ensuring that your training is consistent, there are a lot of lifestyle implications which can make things a lot easier. Now, I know some people might say I might not have time during this day. I might not have time on this particular to train. I don't know whether or not I'm going to have time because of work's getting really crazy. And that's okay. There are going to be times when you have to alter your schedule to make things work because life happens, work happens, studies happen, and that's okay. That's completely fine. You don't want to be putting too much pressure on yourself just because you can't make a particular training day. Obviously, you do want to make up for it the next day or whenever you can. But for the most part, I really do believe that it's all about making time to train. A really easy and simple tip that I provide to clients who are really busy is literally just planning out your training schedule on your calendar and making it work with your work or study schedule. Say, for example, you work 9 to 5, takes you an hour to travel to and from work. You know that you're home by 6. From there, you can schedule in your pre-workout meal, and then schedule training from 6:30 p.m. or from 7 p.m. onwards, right? And literally just plan it out on a calendar. Because end of the day, if you want to commit to training, you want to commit to powerlifting, you do need to make sacrifices to a degree, but you also need to make a conscious effort to train. You can't just rock up to a gym and just train and follow a program and expect to get stronger just by that. You need to be putting in the effort day in and day out, outside of just performing in the gym, and outside of beyond just training in the gym. So If you are feeling like there's a bit of inconsistency in your training, there's a bit of inconsistency in your performance and your progress, the one key thing, if it's not already consistent, is just building some more consistency and fostering a bit more consistency in your training and your training schedule. So hopefully that helped you out. If you did, if you are going to try make your training schedule more consistent, but you need a bit of help, don't hesitate to reach out to me on Instagram or drop a comment below. If you feel like you got some value from this video, please like and subscribe, and I'll see you guys in the next one.